Is all hope lost for the New York Mets? Let's talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. The Mets lost again. Feels like I've opened the show like that every day recently. It's just always Mets lost, Mets lost, Mets lost, Mets lost, Mets lost, Mets lost. But here we are. The season moves on. An off day gives us all a glorious break from watching this team. And maybe, just maybe, they could turn the corner coming up soon here. I felt like that was happening for a lot of the day on Thursday. Mets get a home run in the first inning from Pete Alonso. Brandon Nimmo and DJ Stewart singled that inning. They had Tristan McKenzie on the ropes. There was a mound visit in the first inning. He looked horrible with his body language. It seemed like the Mets were going to get to this starting pitcher and cruise. And while they didn't score in that first inning, second inning, or didn't score again, I should say, after the home run, Jeff McNeil homers in the second. 2 games in a row where Jeff McNeil homers as he's starting to get hot, hopefully. Harrison Bader was hit by a pitch after the home run in the second to McNeil, which very much looked like a Tristan McKenzie is frustrated. He gave up a home run to McNeil. So for some reason, he hits Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader took offense to it. He stole second base. The Mets have to get him in that situation, but they don't. They strand him on second when he was there with no outs. But Bader gets his revenge in the fourth inning. He homers off Tristan McKenzie. And Jose Quintana was cruising, where it felt like those 3 runs were enough until they weren't. But early in the game, Quintana faced the minimum through the first 5 innings. He allowed 2 base runners across that span, one on a base hit that he erased with the double play. The other one, this is where I thought that Quintana was going to give the Mets that 8-inning performance we saw against the Cardinals. I thought we were going to see a repeat performance of that because he actually was able to get retribution for Harrison Bader after he had already gotten some himself with the home run. But he hit a batter, and then he erased the batter immediately with double play. How perfect is that, right? You hit somebody, you get a double play ball. It's like it doesn't matter. You sent the message, and it didn't affect you whatsoever. And I just thought, all right, man, this is that version of Quintana where he's filling up the zone, where he's getting his ground balls, and it looks like it's going to be a great day. Then the 6th inning happened. Gets the first out on a pop-up. Then Austin Hedges lays down the perfect bunt. It's one of those bunts that's hugging the line. Quintana was waiting, hoping that it would go foul because Austin Hedges is a guy that usually love pitching to. He is not a good hitter at all. He has had a lengthy MLB career solely for his glove as a really great defensive backup catcher. But that's a guy you can usually attack, and he just dropped the perfect bunt. And that bunt came back to kill the Mets as they got a fly out. Quintana was able to get a fly out, so he has 2 outs. But with 2 outs, where there could have been 3 had they gotten Hedges out, he gives up a double to Tyler Freeman. And then Andres Jimenez, who looked lost the entire series, worked a great at-bat. I mean, he had his first 2 at-bats in the game where he looked awful against Quintana, chasing everything. And in this at-bat, he was diligent. He did not swing at those pitches that you knew he kind of wanted to, those breaking balls out of the zone. He kept the bat on the shoulder. He got himself into a hitter's count where Quintana had to come into him and pitch because Jose Ramirez was sitting on deck. And sure enough, he throws him a fastball, if I'm not mistaken, but Jimenez was all over it. 3-run homer, new ball game, and you just knew that was a loss. In that moment, the Mets lost the game. When Andres Jimenez crushes that baseball and you see him rounding the bases, good moment for him. I mean, he gets home. He kisses the CLE for Cleveland on his chest, on his jersey. Obviously, this series meant something to him, and it really just deflated everything the Mets had built prior to that. But it's on them, though, because they had a starting pitcher on the ropes. They didn't pile on. And that comes back to haunt you. You're in a tie game at that point, and the Mets have such a thin margin for error where Carlos Mendoza's strategy was, all right, I got Quintana at 70 pitches, but it's a tie ball game. And you just watched him give up a home run. Let's go to Reed Garrett for 2, Adam Ottavino for 1. Hope he's scratch around across the board against a Guardians bullpen that's impossible to score on. And then maybe you get out of the series with a win. But Reed Garrett could not get through that inning without giving up a run. Took 30 pitches just to get through it. Gives up a couple of ground ball hits that, just found the perfect holes and ultimately just was not quite as sharp as he has been in the past. Adam Ottavino comes on for the 8th inning. He too labored to get through it and really got shelled at the end of it all. He hit Andres Jimenez with a pitch, gave up a pair of doubles to Jose Ramirez and Kyle Manzardo. Right there was a 6-3 game, and the Mets were going to come back from that. So really frustrating to see the Mets let one slip away that it felt like they had through the first 6 innings nearly. But that one pitch to Jimenez, and it's just a baseball team in Cleveland that has been amazing this year, and we saw it firsthand in this series. Now I'll tell you, I have my other show, Who's Better Baseball, where we talk about the entire league on the show with my co-host Patrick Lyons, and we've talked about the Guardians and the Royals in that AL Central, and you can get a sense of what a team is by looking at the statistics. But when you do that with the Guardians, you don't necessarily see an overwhelmingly dominant team because top to bottom, they don't have this lineup that's super potent. And I think Gary Cohen said it best during the game. What the Guardians do, or what they've been doing, is they have been taking advantage of every opportunity that they get. They don't get a lot of opportunities, as he said, but when they get those chances, they cash them in. They're a clutch team. They have a great bullpen to win these close games. Meanwhile, the Mets, while their bullpen has been good overall this year, now they're letting some games go, and they aren't winning those late games that they were winning in the 12-3 stretch where they won a bunch of games. So you're really seeing the difference between a great baseball team in Cleveland that is winning within the margins and a team in the Mets that's losing within the margins. And a lot of times that's the difference, right? When you have these teams that are not just overwhelmingly talented like your Phillies or your Braves or your Dodgers, you need to play good, fundamentally sound baseball. And there was just moments throughout this series where the Mets did not do that. And the Guardians on the other side were playing great defense the whole time. Their bullpen was exceptional. I don't think they allowed to run the whole series off the top of my head. Maybe actually, I guess they did in the second game when the Mets, mounted that comeback. But, they held on to every lead, and they just came up with the timely hit whenever they needed it. Jose Ramirez, I haven't talked about him on my other show as a dark horse MVP candidate. I don't think I've even assigned it to our written staff over at Just Baseball as an MVP candidate. And he opened up my eyes in this series because that guy is unbelievable. So the Mets, they end up closing up what turns into a 2-6 road trip. They probably could have won each of those games at the end of the series to Cleveland. They didn't. They definitely should have won that game that Edwin Diaz blew in Miami. Those 3 games go different ways. You're 5-3 on the road trip, and the vibes are completely different. And I don't think the Mets are so far away from that, right? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment. There was winnable games in here that they just lost. And so if you can get momentum on your side and you start playing better baseball, there is some hope. But it's harder and harder to find when you're in the midst of a month where the Mets are 6-14 in May, looking very much like the team in June last year that went 7-19. And guess what? The Mets play 8 more games this month. So they still have an opportunity to be worse than the 2023 Mets were in June with this next week here to play some baseball games. We can change. So we'll see what happens. But I do want to give you some reasons to believe in this lineup because I think we did see some encouraging signs to this series. So I'm going to talk about that in the next segment. First, though, a word from our sponsors. From watching the New York Mets plan this road trip, I'm sure there's nothing that you want more than to go to Citi Field and watch some Mets baseball. Yes, the team is struggling, but you know what? Let's put a positive spin on this. The team is struggling so much that if you go to Game Time, I bet you're going to find some killer deals on tickets for this upcoming homestand. And you know what? It's always fun to be in that ballpark in Citi Field. There's great food. There's baseball that gets played, and maybe it'll be some better baseball coming up. And I'll tell you what, I used Game Time to get my tickets for Mets Marlins in Miami, and it was so easy. I got great seats. It took me literally 45 seconds, and that might even be on the high end of how long it took me to actually find the seats I wanted, to buy my tickets, and to have them sent to my phone. It's that easy. 2 taps, you're all set. All in prices up front, so you know exactly what to expect. There's no hidden fees there, and you can see your seat before you select it, so you know what you're going to see once you get into the ballpark. If you want to buy tickets in seconds and take all the guesswork out of buying your tickets, you can do so with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Tonight, you got Pacers Celtics. So maybe you believe that the Celtics are just a clear-cut favorite. They're going to win the game. They're a 9-point favorite in the game right now from FanDuel. So you can just take them money line to win the game, and guess what? You're going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Also, though, if you wanted to, maybe you can look at the points. You think the Pacers are going to hang in there and be within 9 points? You also got to acknowledge that the Celtics have been dropping game twos throughout the playoffs. A little bit of a letdown after game one victories. So maybe you take the Pacers. Regardless, if you win that first bet, you're going to take in $150 in bonus bets guaranteed that you can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider so you get all the latest on your New York Mets. This is our texting service where I can send you updates anytime something breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. We can go back and forth. You also get the starting 9 graphic texted to your phone each day, so you know who's going to be in the lineup for the Mets, and you can take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. So if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, the Mets started off this month in a series against the Cubs that held over from April, and it was a series that they split that they easily could have won. Then they go to Tampa. They get swept by the Rays in a series where they blew a game with Edwin Diaz, and it really was a Rays team that was just on the cusp, but the Mets could have won some of those games. Then they swept the Cardinals in a 2-game set with a rainout. So that was the one good series so far this month. And from that point on, they ran into the buzzsaw that is the Braves, and then even more so the Phillies. Hit a new low losing a series to the Marlins, and then they played this team in Cleveland that is just clicking on all cylinders. So when you look at this month and what the Mets have gone through, yes, they have embarrassed themselves multiple occasions. Edwin Diaz has cost the Mets 3 games at least that could have gone the other way. Their offense has been stagnant at times. But I still look at this and say there's a lot that has gone wrong. This has been a rough stretch. But I believe the Mets are better than what we've seen this month. Are they 12-3 good? No. Are they this bad? No. I still wholeheartedly believe that this is a 500 team. And when you slip to 7 games under 500, you know what that typically means if you're a 500 team? You're about to go through a positive stretch where you win some games and get yourself back to 500. If the Mets can do that over this stretch before they get to London, which is asking a lot, but if they can get closer and closer to that 500 mark, and they come back from London and they have the rest of June and all of July before the deadline to put themselves into contention, they still have time to be a competitive team this year. And I do know for a fact when you watch these guys, there's guys in that clubhouse that want this. And they don't want to endure another horrible season. Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso. They want to go out and they want to have a season that ends on their terms and not ends at the trade deadline again. And so now you got to go out and prove it. But I look at this 10-game homestand, and in a lot of ways, I feel like it can define the Mets season. because either they stop the bleeding and win some series, or they keep this free fall going and the hole gets too big. 7 games under 500 is pretty bad. 10 games under 500 is a lot worse. And if they lose all 3 series that they have coming up here, so 3 against the Giants, 3 against the Dodgers, then a 4-gamer against the Diamondbacks. If they lose all 3 series and go 3-7 during that stretch, they're going to be 11 games under 500. And then they'll have 3 games in DC against a Nationals team that's frisky before they go overseas where the Phillies are ready to spank them in front of an international audience. So this 10-game homestand is everything to the New York Mets. It's important to finally win some games in front of your home crowd, to get them back into it, to feel better when you actually are at home, because right now, being at home hasn't been the best thing, although the road didn't treat the Mets too well on this last trip. So the Mets have to change the narrative of this season, and it starts on Friday night with their young stud on the mound, Christian Scott. He can give them a gem, and they can give him some run support, and the Mets win that game, and then you get Severino in game 2, Manaea game 3. The Mets can get back into the hunt here, but it's got to start. And here's the reasons for optimism when it comes to this starting lineup that I look at and say, all right, can this team find a cohesive unit that can win baseball games? We start with Pete Alonso and JD Martinez. So over the last 15 days, Pete Alonso sitting 296, 356 on base, 519 slug. He's got an 875 OPS. JD Martinez hitting 292, 320 on base, 500 slug. Those guys are run producers that are hitting for average right now, but there's still more meat on the bone when it comes to slugging and driving in runs. So if those two guys can take what's been a good couple of weeks and turn it up a little bit more, and they get some opportunities because Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo start to get on base before them, all of a sudden this team can start to roll. And when it comes to Lindor and Nimmo, I was very curious what the difference was between batting average and expected batting average. And I know a lot of you who watch this show, all you care about is that number next to the name. The fact that, Brandon Nimmo's hitting 218, Francisco Lindor is hitting 198. You don't care how hard they're hitting the baseball, the hard outs, the line drive, like that. None of that matters. And I understand that. But what I'm telling you is there is tangible data that suggests future performance. It does. That the results that they're getting when it comes to straight batting average does not measure everything for a player. What we now have with StatCast and all this data is we can learn, okay, that ball that Francisco Lindor scalded into the gap, that a right fielder got a great jump on and made a leaping catch. Well, that ball 7 times out of 10 is a double. But guess what? This time it was an out. And you can start to paint a picture of how these guys have been performing based on not only, what we're seeing on the field, the results, but actually on how hard they're hitting the baseball, where they're hitting it, what positions they're putting themselves in when it comes to the counts that they're in, how much they're striking out, how much they're walking. And if you look at the expected batting average for Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo, what I've found is they are among the top 4 hitters in the league when it comes to the biggest discrepancy between their actual batting average and their expected batting average. So Brandon Nimmo is hitting 218, but his expected batting average is 288. Francisco Lindor is hitting 198. His expected batting average is 265. So Nimmo should be 70 points better. Lindor should be 67 points better based on what the data is telling us. So as you move forward, these guys are due to hit for a higher average. And for Nimmo, his slugging percentage, there's a 135-point difference between his expected slug and his actual slug. So there is much more room here for him to get some extra doubles, some home runs, to actually have a better slugging percentage on top of it. Lindor, there's a 99-point difference as well. So he has an abysmal 349 slugging percentage. It should be closer to 450, which is more what you would expect from Francisco Lindor. I will die on this island, I guess. I'm sure I'm one of the few that's still on it. I believe those two guys will be better. And with that 4, and then you add Mark Vientos in as a 5th, atop your lineup, I think the Mets have what it takes to score some runs. And then on top of that, you look at Jeff McNeil over the last 2 games in Cleveland, seems to be clicking a little bit better, hits a couple home runs, drives the baseball a bunch, hitting the ball hard all of a sudden. If McNeil can go on a hot streak and have a 4 to 6 week stretch where he's batting champion Jeff McNeil again, which is so far out of our rearview mirror that it's hard to remember, but it is in there. And he's a guy that you don't really know how much he's doing in the offseason when it comes to baseball activities. And so maybe now he's starting to round into form. Whatever it is, if he can play better and Harrison Bader is swinging a hot bat right now, well, all of a sudden you got 7 guys in this lineup that can be doing stuff for you on a game in, game out basis where, all right, you can start to see a cohesive unit forming that might actually win some games. You look at the other 2 spots, you got catcher with Tomas Nido, who has been swinging a bit better. Omar Narvaez has been a disaster. So you can't expect too much from that spot, but at least Nido looks a little bit comfortable in the box right now. And then lastly, you got Starling Marte, who's struggling, and DJ Stewart, who could start to eat into his playing time. I don't know how much we're going to see Tyrone Taylor, and there's a whole other conversation to be had about the backup third baseman of Brett Baty, or are they going to add somebody? And we'll talk about that in the next segment. But I really believe that there is a group here with Lindor, Nimmo, Alonso Martinez, and Vientos, and the contributions you could get from Bader, McNeil, and then whoever that third outfielder is, whether it's Marte or DJ Stewart, where this team could go on a little bit of a roll offensively, and they are due for that. Most teams don't just suck start to finish all year. And we saw the Mets have a good stretch. I feel like they're due for another one, and maybe that's just the eternal optimist in me. And you want to tell me I'm wrong in the comment section on YouTube, by all means. I'm not standing on solid ground here with this ball club, but something tells me that they are still a good enough team to find 500 again this year. And if they do that, you're squarely in the mix. So we'll see what happens. There are decisions to be made, though, and I want to talk about those decisions. I think another reason for looking at the Mets right now and saying there's some light at the end of the tunnel is because there's going to be some more bad players who have not been performing. They're going to get removed from this team. We saw that with Joey Wendell. I think there could be a couple more guys that are taken off the roster for this homestand. So we'll talk about that next. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Yesterday, I screwed up. I had Pete Alonso more on the fantasy score. He hit a home run. We got that one. I'm not a big hockey guy, and here I am trying to pull for the Rangers, and I take Chris Kreider's shots on goal. He only had 2 shots on goal, so it was less than the 2.5 number. I ended up losing my entry. Today, we're sticking baseball. So Luis Arraez to score a run against the Reds is the first one I'm looking at, set at 0.5. So I'm taking more for him to score just 1 run. I got Luis Castillo and Luis Gil in the Mariners-Yankees matchup to not allow a run in the first inning between the 2 of them. I think it's going to be some scoring after those guys exit. So that's my other part of the entry. And then Ellie De La Cruz, more than 1.5 bases. If he doubles, we're in. Prize Picks has something for every sports fan. So you can also look at the playoff games tonight with Celtics, Pacers, NHL, and more. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, an enormous selection of players and stat types, or it makes Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the Prize Picks app. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. Stay locked into all the latest in the world of sports with Locked On Sports Today, hosted by our local experts for each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Locked On Sports Today is where you should go for all of your coverage of the playoffs right now and, of course, the Major League Baseball season. Check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. So, who's going to be off this roster for the homestand? The most obvious answer is Brett Baty. I think it's time. I spoke about it on the last 2 shows. You go back to Wednesday's show, I was breaking down why Baty needs to go down and iron out his swing. On Thursday's show, I talked about Mark Vientos and how he has earned the right to be the Mets starting third baseman. And we sort of saw that pass of the baton or the torch, whatever you want to call it, as he starts the final 2 games of that series in Cleveland against right-handed starters, and he delivered. Had a double and a walk today. He is giving you great at-bats. You need his bat in the starting lineup right now with the way this offense has struggled. There's just no other way around it. And you don't need Brett Baty languishing on the bench in a backup role. That is not what's best for him. He's got to work on his swing. He's got to play every day at third base, or even maybe work on some versatility, whether that's going back, getting some left field action, or if it's actually trying him at second base, which not something that I would necessarily have expected for Brett Baty, But that might be where this season takes you. If Brett Baty and Mark Vientos are going to be on the roster at the same time, one of them has to be able to play another position. And Mark Vientos might earn himself the starting third base job if he keeps hitting, where Baty's got to fill in other ways. So I think sending him down, letting him work on his hitting first and foremost is the most important thing. But even, letting him get an occasional start at second just to see what it looks like if you do decide to go back to a platoon at third base or some semblance of one. I think there's a lot of growth that can happen with Brett Baty in AAA. So that's the first one. I think it's going to happen. The question is, who's going to replace him? And there's 3 candidates. And I've seen some fans on this show, some of the insiders who have texted me back and forth on this one. And there is sort of for the people who pay attention to Syracuse, there's an idea that Rylan Bannon or Luke Ritter are the better options to come up and give the Mets a jolt than Jose Iglesias. And it's fair. Those 2 guys are hitting. Bannon's hitting 264 on the year, 407 on base, 512 slug. He has 31 walks to 32 strikeouts. So that shows you a really refined discipline at the plate from Bannon. He's got some pop with the 8 home runs and 6 doubles and a triple. And not only that, he has actually played some shortstop. It's been 3 games, but it has happened. So that does give you an option there where Rylan Bannon could be your backup third baseman, backup shortstop, backup second baseman. He's also played left field and right field. So he does give you that super utility ability off the bench. That is very valuable. And if you had to make a case for one of the 3 based on the bat, I would probably side with Bannon because he does have some major league experience, not a ton, some, but he's definitely got, when you look at the on-base percentage, the walks, the strikeouts, everything else, he sort of has the best approach in the box right now of those 3. Luke Ritter, though, also swinging it, hitting 260 on the year, 373 on base, 478 slug. Over the last couple weeks, he's hitting 289 with a 385 on base. He's a guy that's been in the Mets system for some time now. He's played mostly first base this year, but has also played second, third, and left. So another guy that gives you a lot of positional flexibility, but not a guy I think you can stick at shortstop, which is a problem. Also has not had any major league experience. And this is where I keep coming back to Jose Iglesias, because you have to not only look at what the guys are doing in AAA, but look at the role that would be in front of them at the big league level. And it's filling the Joey Wendell role, which was maybe you get 1 start every 2 weeks and you're probably just coming in for defense at times. And really, I think it's a guy that's going to come in and play third base for Mark Vientos at the end of games when you have a lead, particularly. So if that's the role, and I look at those 3 guys, I'll take the MLB shortstop, or I should say the guy that has had a long career as an MLB shortstop, who can be your backup shortstop still, backup second baseman, but can play third base in a pinch and is going to be really good with the glove and is not going to languish on the bench and not know how to prepare himself to enter an MLB game at any time. This is a guy that has the experience to be able to thrive in a very limited role. And it's because of that I think he is the one that gets the call for Brett Baty. Yes, you could say Bannon is the better option if you need a starting third baseman. You probably could say the same thing about Luke Ritter, but this is not to start at third base. Mark Vientos is the starter. If Vientos falls flat in his face and Baty can't hit in AAA, well, then maybe there is a world where Rylan Bannon does come up and he's your starting third baseman at some point this season if the kids can't hold it down. But for right now, I just don't see that happening. I think it's going to be Iglesias that comes up. Now, beyond that, Adrian Hauser could be DFA'd here, and I hope he is. David Peterson is good to join this rotation on Wednesday. I imagine they're going to give him one more rehab start because he's not eligible to come off the IL until Monday the 27th. And at that stage, the Mets would still be able to go to Tyler McGill and Jose Quintana for the first 2 games of that series against the Dodgers. So I think David Peterson is going to make his return on Wednesday, the 3rd game of that series, and be part of a 6-man rotation for this next stretch of 13 games in 13 days. If you're going to carry Peterson as the 6th starter, Hauser in the bullpen, it makes the margin very thin when it comes to getting through these games, because you really need to have as many arms as you can down there. You need arms that you can cycle, and you can't cycle Adrian Hauser. He has no options. He has not pitched well this year, so I think you DFA Hauser, you get an extra arm in your bullpen for this series against the Giants, because Hauser is not going to be able to pitch in this series anyway. And then you go to Peterson and you go to the 6-man rotation at the end of that series against the Dodgers. That means you can have 8 guys in the pen for the next 5 games. That's valuable. And with the depth that they still have with Jose Butto and Joey Lucchesi in AAA, not even to mention the fact that you have Dom Hamill, Mike Vassell, and now Blade Tidwell all pitching in AAA, the Mets have plenty of starting pitching depth. That's not even mentioning Kodai Senga. You don't need Adrian Hauser anymore. We'll see if David Stearns ignores the sentiment that he might have towards his former player from the Brewers and lets him go. But I think that's the right thing for this team. Now, you remove Hauser, who's pitched bad this year, and Baty, who hasn't hit in a month. That makes the team better. Beyond that, Francisco Alvarez could return in the coming weeks, which is a huge, huge development. Carlos Mendoza said today that Alvarez has started baseball activities. He's caught. He has hit off a tee, and he will likely take a turn at taking some BP this weekend. So that will give him the next big step. If he fares well in batting practice, you eventually get to a point where he'll take some live BP, where he's going to face velocity. And if all goes well through that, all of a sudden you might see Francisco Alvarez starting a rehab assignment. They said that the original timeline of mid to late June is still what they're shooting for, but you know that Alvarez is chomping at the bits to get back. And if he can pass every test over the next week here, maybe in the following week, he's ready to start a rehab assignment when the Mets are playing the Nationals and then going to London. And if that rehab assignment goes well and he's able to catch back-to-back days and he's swinging the bat and he's in a good rhythm, you never know. Not too long after London, Francisco Alvarez can join this lineup again. And if across this 15-game stretch where the Mets have the next 13 and then the 2 in London, if they can get themselves somewhat closer, like tangibly closer to 500, let's just say they come out of London with a split and they end up at 3 games under 500 or 2 games under 500 through this stretch, and they win a couple series before that. They win the series against the Giants, the one against the Diamondbacks, and the one in Washington. They lose to the Dodgers, whatever it ends up being. If they're in that position where they're very close to 500 with a couple weeks left to play in June and all of July, and your starting lineup can be Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, JD Martinez, Mark Vientos, Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Alvarez, and Harrison Bader, with a bench of DJ Stewart, Tomas Nido, Tyrone Taylor, and Jose Iglesias, I think that's a good team. I think their 6-man rotation could be good. And by the end of June, going into July at some point, you might eventually get your ace back. But if that lineup starts to hit and the 6-man rotation can work out for them, this Mets team can look a lot better throughout the rest of this month and in June. I'm hoping that's what happens. I'm trying to give you an optimistic viewpoint of it, but this team's got to do it. And you can only if and but about things for so long before you just have to look at the pig that's staring you in the face and say, this team's not good. And I've been there over the last couple of weeks. There's been times where I've lost the hope and the faith. And I don't know why I'm optimistic off of them getting swept, but I just saw enough from Jeff McNeil swinging it better, Harrison Bader, from Mark Vientos, and the jolt that he's giving this lineup, and seeing how good of a hitter JD Martinez is. And I still don't even think he has reached midseason form yet. Knowing that that Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo can't be worse than this, they can only be much, much better. I still have a little bit of belief in this team. Call me crazy. I own that because I know a lot of you have already given up on the season, and I cannot blame you for 1 second. But hey, it's still May. So you know what? Until we get to June and July and it really becomes that obvious, what do they say again as Mets fans? Oh, yeah, you got to believe, right? That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Blade Tidwell starting for the first time in AAA. So that would be great to talk about his debut in AAA. So we'll have a full Friday farm report tomorrow going through his start, what we've seen from Brandon Sproat, Nolan McLean, all these guys continue to progress in the Mets farm system, and they're making solid starts. So we'll talk about all of it on the show. Make sure if you're listening on the audio side, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to make a push to 9,000 subs. Keep getting closer and closer. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.